Hello there, beautiful people. So, this week has been a week of the universe tapping me on the forehead, reminding me of a story that happened to me recently. Something I've tried to share before, but I seem to just skim the surface. So, with the events of this week, I'm going to give it a crack, see if we can go a little bit deeper. This is a bit of a spoiler alert. This isn't a grab for attention. This is, I hope it's going to turn out to be a story of inspiration, a story of motivation. Because really what this story is about action, and what I did post all these events to make myself a better man, a better human. Anyway, with that, we'll dive right in. So, as with much of my life, the story unfolded from one to the other. So I'm going to start with, I think, the precursor to what put me in prison. And that was, I came out the bush in about 2017, helping save elephants and lions and all this lovely stuff. Was romantic, and I enjoyed the hell out of it. But it doesn't pay the bills. My son was about to be born. My daughter was now about 3. So I took up a trade in Zimbabwe. If anyone knows anything about it, you'll understand why this is quite a bizarre move for me as a farmer. So I'd never seen the workings of a farm. I'd been on plenty. I'd done a little bit of tobacco 10 years prior, and I'd messed around, but it was all just sort of fun and games. Someone had a farm that was in trouble, and I said I'd take over and fix it. And don't ask me how. It's one of those miracles of Aaron and the skill set I have is I managed to do just that very, very quickly. It was a poultry farm. I was farming 235,000 birds across 3 locations, just outside of Harare in Zimbabwe. And as with anything I do, I went to it like a bull in a china shop. And I did some amazing things, not by myself. It was this incredible staff I had and the people that decided that the corruption and the thievery and the lies was enough, and decided to side with the white knight who decided he wanted to take on the politics and wanted to take on all of these evils, and I loved it. But sadly, I pushed too far. I was a minority, a foreigner at that, an Australian in Africa. And I didn't stop fighting, and I didn't know when to stop, and I pissed off people. When you stop the honey cart and you stop the money, people in Africa don't take too kindly to it. But I kept pushing, and I didn't stop, and I became more aggressive about it. And I actually had people in politics side with me. The problem with African politics is overnight things can change very, very quickly. And boy, did they change. And when they changed, they came gunning for me. Like many white farmers in Africa, my story is very mild compared to what happened to many men in that place. So anyway, I just want to take note of that because I don't want to make out that I had anywhere near as close to the loss and the issues that had happened in the early 2000s there. Needless to say, it was aggressive, it was not comfortable having your staff threatened with death every day, and living like that pushed me to a point where I started to unravel. And eventually unraveled, just put it that way. There's another story in there that I think I'll share another time. And I had to leave because I don't think I was going to live much longer, or I was going to end up having to leave because I just ruffled feathers of too many of the high and heavy hitters in ZANU-PF. So I went and I took up a smaller job, actually a really nice job, a calm job, something that I'm not very, very used to. And I sat quietly and I plodded along in that job. It was hyperinflation in Zimbabwe again. It was juggling currencies. It had a little bit of adrenaline in it, but it certainly wasn't anything I'd faced in the past. One day, I went to work early. It was about 6 o'clock in the morning. And 6:30, my phone started ringing from a number I didn't know, so I just ignored it. It's not uncommon in Africa to just get missed calls from wrong numbers. And it kept happening. Eventually, I decided, maybe it's an emergency of some order, so I answered it. And it was some guy asking me where I was, saying he was a government official. And I didn't really think I had anything to worry about. So I told him where I was. Anyway, he came to my work, to the front gate. He come across the gate boundary, so he stood there and it was a standoff. And I could see something menacing was about to happen, but for some reason I stepped through and into that front yard and I was instantly arrested. Now, what I noticed very quickly was there were some men in some funny uniforms that I'd seen before and I knew very well, and these were immigration officials. Now, part of this story sadly goes back to about 2013, where like every person who isn't an African will face extortion by the immigration department, and I had a daughter on the way and I just couldn't cleanse the issues that immigration had with me, and I wasn't leaving my soon-to-be born daughter, so I did I did the same thing most guys and most women do, and even some Zimbabwean born people have to do, and that is abort a document. And then afterwards it just got tossed away, never thought much of it. So that document had now come back to haunt me. In a nutshell, the immigration people were charging me with fraud, counterfeiting, and about 14 other charges. And and I was being brought up on those charges. Put that into perspective, I can guarantee you now that about 95% of the population of non-Africans in that country have done exactly the same process for exactly the same reason, because they got tired of paying the low-level immigration guys bribes. Because you're on tap, you're constantly paying. You know, they want school fees, you pay them money. They want beer, you give them money. And so it gets to a point where everyone goes a little higher, pays a little bit more, and supposedly solves the problem. The downside to that is I was now wanted for pissing off a lot of politicians. So this was pulled out of a file, it was used against me, and I was arrested. So initially what happened was they put me through the ringer. They wanted me out of the country. They wanted to squeeze me so tight that I would just jump on a plane and run. And I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't leaving my two kids. And I told them the only way I was going to do it was in a box. And I meant it. And after a couple of days of them squeezing me, for want of a bit of a description, they realised I wasn't going to fold. So they put me through the cells and then eventually arraigned me and charged me officially and put me into the judicial system in Zimbabwe. What happened then was where it got really interesting, because, you know, during that 2 days there was fear, there was anger, there was sadness. Funnily enough, I was thinking about it earlier, and you know where the fear was? It was not about fear about the prison, it wasn't fear about any of that. I'd faced down that sort of manly, masculine, alpha male fear bullshit plenty of times in my life. It was the fear of failure, it was the fear of letting go, it was the fear of what was going to happen to my kids, it was the fear of loss of control, loss of protection. And even now that chokes me up thinking about it, and you'll understand why as this live goes on. And I'm going to apologise, it looks like it's going to be a long one. I was eventually sent to Harare Central Prison in Zimbabwe, and that first sort of couple of hours in there was quite hairy. It was a remand centre. There was a lot of refugees and a lot of guys from all over Africa, you name it, Burundi, Gambia, Congolese, South African, Zambians, Tswana, so Botswanans, Mozambicans. There was one of everything, if not five of everything. There was only one of me. And what I mean by that is only one with white skin colour. And they tested me and they pushed me. And I guess I was lucky I played a fine middle ground, and I guess I was also very lucky I was in Zimbabwe, not South Africa, because would have been dead within the first 24 hours. So I got to a point where they sent me to the cells for the first night, and I was put in with about 75 guys in about a 6x15 cell. I'd say the prison probably hadn't been cleaned in about 40 years, probably since independence. I'm going to describe it. I don't normally, but there were cockroaches. The smell was something that even now I still get a whiff of every now and then. There was one toilet which was blocked. There was airflow, luckily, just, and I put myself under a window. I had a blanket, lice infested, but I had a blanket. And I remember the guy beside me at one point, he had great English. He was Shona, so he was a Zimbabwean guy, and he struck up a conversation with me, and I found out that he was a really well-educated kid, and he got caught stealing, like probably 90% of the guys in that remand centre at the time. And he asked me to pray with him. Now, these guys are apostles. They pray in a very different way to what many of you would be used to. So I did. And I wish I could share that feeling of what that was like. Anyway, we'll move on. The next day, everyone sized me up. I was a smoker back then, so I had cigarettes, so I was a walking bag of currency. So everyone was trying to squeeze and see if there was a way to make some money. I don't back down easily, I'll put it that way. There was some violence that sort of needed to happen. I'm not proud of it. But when you're the one white guy in a prison, I think that remand centre section had about 370 or 380 guys. If I didn't, there was going to be trouble for me. So I staked my claim of a little area and started working out like you do in all the prison films and all the prison shows. There was multiple reasons for that. One is I was expecting more fights. And two is I was angry. Now that the fear had subsided, the anger crept in underneath. And so I was angry is an understatement. With certain people, with the situation, with the abuse of human rights I was seeing, the food. I hadn't touched any food now. It was about 2.5 days, not about half a litre of water. I was going to hunger strike it and all that sort of shit, but you know, I didn't at that point, and that'll become clear in a second. And eventually what I noticed was there were two guys who seemed to be running the entire prison. There was one guard in the whole yard. He sat there on his phone. He paid no attention, and the system and the prisoners did what they want when they wanted as they went around. But there was a big Ethiopian guy, and at that time, a really, really, really dark-skinned guy. So I knew he was from the north. He turned out to be South Sudanese. Now, I can't use their real names because they're still in there, and I'm still trying to work with Amnesty to try and help them get out of there. But I'm just going to call them Frank and David. Not very Ethiopian names, or South Sudanese, but look, that's just what we're going to go with. Now, Frank is Ethiopian. For many of you from the first word, you've seen 40-hour famine ads and NGO rubbish about Ethiopia. This was not what you've been led to believe. This man was 6'1". He was good, easy 105 kgs. He had chisel features of an Egyptian. He was from the Amara tribe. This was an incredibly proud, just incredible man. And he's part of the reason that I'm being motivated to jump on here and share this today. And David, he was South Sudanese. And he was the same. Built like an ox, short, intense. And another incredible man. At one point, they'd sized me up and seen what had been going on, and they came over and decided to bring me into their clique, or whatever you want to call it. We shared some bread and some tea. It became very quick. It became very evident to me that both of these men were effectively running the prison. The guards hid and stayed in their offices, and these two kept it all safe. So I do believe at that point the universe, God, source, or whatever you call it, looked down on me and sent me two warriors, because that's what they both were. From that point onwards in that prison, we were like brothers. They looked after me in a way they didn't have to. I was smuggling things into the prison at this point, food, cigarettes, and they never asked for any of it. I gave it freely and let them control it, purely because I was just so humbled by the fact that they decided to protect me in a way of being equals as well. This wasn't like a hide in the corner, everyone stay away from him. It was pretty much stand beside us and we'll do this together. And this was within an hour of sort of talking with them. And you know, I can't really paint a picture of what these conditions were like, the depravity, the sickness, the disease, but to understand what that did for this entire experience and for me. because what started happening, this is now 3 days in, was I just started to learn. I started to grow through every single moment. Everything slowed down. I watched the generosity and I watched the kindness, and then I balanced it off with the depravity. And every day I was in that centre, I had to almost every day to attend court, because I was now fighting for my right to stay in Zimbabwe. They wanted instant deportation, or they wanted 6 years at that point. And I wasn't leaving, and I was prepared to do the 6 years and fight from inside, but I also did what we do in Africa, and that is pay all and sundry that we can to try and beat the system. So I was paying, and I was paying, and I was paying, trying to bribe whoever and everyone we could to try and get me out of there so I could fight from outside. During that time, I got really close to both Frank and David, and there was a number of other guys from Ghana. Yeah, and we sort of sat there and we shared stories about the world, you know, and I'd been in the bush chasing animals, and sort of within about 5 or 6 days with these men, every one of them had vowed to return to their home country and make me environment minister because of my opinions on the environment and on conservation. I think back on that, and it humbles me greatly. You know, these were great men. I didn't mention that every single one of them were in there for immigration violations. Frank had been in for 6 years with no charge. David had been in for 5. Some of the other men had been in for anywhere from 3 to 4 years with no charges. What had happened is they'd all tried to gain refugee status, and the Zimbabwean government had denied it, locked them up, because their home governments didn't want them returning and causing trouble, usually because of internal strife, civil wars, being on the wrong side. And they were just rotting. The world had forgotten them. I don't. Yeah, anyway, sorry about that. These were good men. Wasting the time in prison because of African corruption. And I kid you not, when you hear about African corruption, you have no clue, even remotely, the depth of what goes on in that place. So anyway, as we got closer to Christmas in December of 2018, I come to enjoy prison in a weird, sick way. I wanted out. I wanted to see my kids. I was missing them dearly. But at the same time, you know, the ego had kicked in, the mateship and the loyalty with these men had kicked in, and it was just this survival and this balance that I was learning from every day, learning to meditate in a cell 6x15 that you're locked in for sort of 18 hours a day with that much noise was a lesson in itself. Then there were other lessons about the balance, use of anger, allowing sadness, courage, when it's blind and when it's compassionate. So eventually my money and my bribes worked, and I was released just before Christmas 2018 to see my kids. My kids were told I was in the bush somewhere, I think Wangi, they were told, working with some rhino or something. So so that was the most incredible Christmas ever for me. I got a little bit sick when I got out with a thing called bilharzia, which is a parasite, and I got pneumonia and all sorts of stuff. You know, my body carried me through that prison stay with such incredible strength. You know, I was living on peanut butter, bits of bread, smuggled in onions, chilies, garlic. I got some gingerboard in because guys were getting sick, so I was eating raw whatever we could get, and it was good. I became prison doctor, prison lawyer, and prison addictions counsellor, which is another story. We'll tell another time. So I was released, and then I had to go to court every week for about 10 months. And then what happened was, in August of last year, I'd paid magistrates, public prosecutors, and I'm happy to say that here, I paid everyone, immigration bosses, you name it. I paid them all for me to see my day in court, for the charges to be dropped, and for me to be able to stay in Zimbabwe with my kids. Now, there were moments through this court where I had this sneaking suspicion something wasn't right. My gut was telling me, I ignored it. Well, on the day of sentencing in August last year, I paid for not listening to my gut. My lawyer had set me up. I don't think half the money had gone to the people that were supposed to. I went from a day of sentencing and walking out after paying some fines to back in the cells underneath the courtroom to being booked into Harare Central Prison again that evening. That was just a different prison, so 4,000 prisoners in here, 1 or 2 white prisoners in that section. But again, God, universe, source, whatever you want to call it, my faith set me into the right section of that prison at the right time. I spent an evening freezing. It was below zero in a prison that was about 80 years old from the Rhodesian days. I woke up alone in this time. This was a completely new section, and there was fear this time. And I'm not going to deny it. The first time I just didn't face it, but this time, within an hour of that first morning's wake up, I was kicked out of that cell, and I was being pushed upon by all and sundry for any connection to the outside world, any money I could bring in. And I waited and I waited, and I picked my fight better this time. Straight after that, I had some ex-military guys come and take me into their clique. Again, probably very, very lucky that happened, because this was a different world. At this point, I was being threatened with, I think it was a minimum, first sentence was 3 months prison, and then I had to continue serving out fraud was up to 10 years, and they were still fighting. So there was an issue about whether that would be enforced. Again, they were trying to deport me. I said, no, I'm going to fight this from prison, I'll stay. And this is where, you know, my ex and the mother of my children comes into it. She came to that prison, I think it was a second morning, once we'd realised that I'd been shafted, and then there was no escape, that my solicitor had done me over, and I was screwed. And the prison rags they put me in, they hardly covered up pretty much anything. And so when she walked in, she just burst into tears. And I'm laughing because it's not funny. Seriously, it was not a nice feeling to see the look on her face when she saw me. But she had food, and she'd bought smokes inside currency. Well, I'd given up smoking by this point. So she started the pressure on me that, take the deportation, get out of here, it's time to leave. So I considered this, and she kept coming every single day, bless her heart, for doing so. There were other people who would have, but this time she decided to step in and do that for me. We worked every section of the machine we could in the background, from politics through immigration, trying to find someone who would stand in and just basically pardon me, because it's not impossible in Africa. But no one wanted to do it because of who I'd upset. When I was back on the farm, it was, you know, the African politics had turned, and the people that I'd upset had moved right up the chain, and they were swinging a big axe. So after about 5 days, I agreed to the deportation. I hadn't seen my kids, so I didn't know this was going to happen. So that fear of failure, and that fear of letting them down, and refusing to let them come into that place and know where I was. To this day, they still don't know. And I guess the reality that I was going to have to head back to a country I'd been gone from for 15 years wasn't a pleasant one, and it was mainly driven by this fear of what I was going to do about my children. So anyway, long story short, I did a couple of weeks in and was put on a plane and deported back to Australia. To sum up my experiences in prison, and to sum up why I've jumped on here, and I know it's long, I doubt anyone will have got from beginning to end, is there's anger and there's sadness and there's fear, and there's a lot of really strong emotions. But I sit here now, and the things that I remember are Frank and David. I remember my ex. I remember the compassion, I remember the gratitude, and I remember the kindness. I remember the bond. I remember the loyalty, and I can still see and feel a lot of the horrible stuff that went on in that place. But every single time I do that, I see a positive on the other side of it. And this is the nature of my journey, and this is why this is one of many big, deep, and I guess incredible, amazing stories in my life. is I've been given these experiences partly because I make silly mistakes, which is just the human part of me, but also so I can rise through them and overcome. I walked out of that prison sad because I had to go without saying goodbye to my kids, but I walked out stronger than I walked in. Walked out more compassionate than I walked in. Walked out with more understanding of humans. I walked out with a fire that was very much driven by purpose and focus instead of just this crazy idea of a challenge and overcoming and wanting the adrenaline to keep pumping and keep pumping, because that's what I'd done my entire life up to this point. I'd allowed and felt the masculine energy inside of me needed to prove something. Chasing elephants, chasing lions, moving country whenever it suited me. The drugs, the alcohol, the women, all of it had been this masculine desire to prove and overcome, prove and overcome, prove and overcome. Look at me, look what I've just survived. When I came out of prison, I was grounded, and it's funny that an experience like that can do that to you. And it's one of the things I like to teach men now, was that stoicism. I hear people put a lot of shit on the word, and I think that's a real shame, because I saw people with nothing stand tall, stand stoic, stand proud, protect others, stand up against prison violence, prison guards, violence, theft and corruption, and I did the same. And it's got me to a point now where I can look at myself on this phone talking and be proud of the man I am. Still haven't got back to my kids yet, and I haven't managed to get them here. But right now, I know that that's just a patience game, and there is an inevitable conclusion to this story. There is a lot more going on that I could have sort of waded into, but I think as usual with this story, there's so much to it. I've waded off into the shallower waters and not been as in depth as I'd like. But I wanted to challenge myself just to get on here and be raw and not try and think of what I was going to say. I wanted to also just prove that something like this, an experience like this in anyone's life, and now it may be Zimbabwean prison for me, it may be a mortgage foreclosure for you, it may be a divorce, it may be the loss of a loved one. Every single one of these experiences that shapes up and shows up in your life is a lesson. There is a positive to each and every moment. I promise you that I'm a walking testament to the fact that you can find a smile, you can find a lesson, and then you can find a way to share that and help someone else in everything that happens to you. And I look forward to continue coming into this space, continuing to share, connect, and offering an opportunity to maybe offer some inspiration, some support to someone who thinks that it's the end and it's all too hard and they've had enough. And until it's never over until you choose for it to be. Thanks very much, guys.